Oh, Cayman moon,
The voice of the Cayman Islands, Radio Cayman.
shining down from above.
We love our listeners.
Radio Cayman in the Cayman Islands. Money Sense is brought to you with the support of OneTradeX. OneTradeX, the Cayman Islands' #1 choice for online brokerage. OneTradeX knows there's more than one way to invest. OneTradeX is the Cayman Islands' only fully licensed online broker-dealer, offering discount trading services to individual investors and traders, hedge fund managers, and family offices. OneTradeX has the most competitive online trading prices of any offshore broker worldwide, with no custody or management fees, free demonstration accounts, and no charge to open an account with a $5,000 minimum deposit. Trade stocks, options, futures, bonds, and Forex. Learn more and open your free demo account today at OneTradeX.com. OneTradeX, the Cayman Islands' #1 choice for online brokerage. OneTradeX is licensed to conduct securities investment business by the Cayman Islands Monetary Authority.
Live from Radio Cayman Studio, this is
Money Sense, bringing an informed financial perspective to the Cayman community.
Hello and welcome to Money Sense. I'm your host, Emil Kalinowski, and my guest is Charlie Durant, Research Manager at CRU, a business intelligence company focusing on mining, metal, and fertilizer markets. This morning we will talk about copper and leave the fertilizer discussion for shows that focus on politics. Our guest joins us by phone from Britain as we broadcast from the studio of Radio Cayman, 89.9 in Grand Cayman. Charlie, welcome to Money Sense.
Hi, Emil. Nice to join you.
Charlie, what makes copper important?
Well, that's a fantastic question. What I think really makes copper so important is the really broad end use that you find copper in. I mean, copper is used in almost literally everything that we touch on the electronic side. More than that, it's in all of the buildings that surround us, and it's used incredibly heavily during an economy's development. And also, when an economy matures, you'll see the end-use profile of the metal change as well. So at the beginning, you might see a lot of infrastructure investment on power and networks. And then as a country evolves really economically, you start seeing it in more high-value goods. So I think it really is that it really reflects the fundamentals of the economy.
The global economy, right?
Yes and no is how I'd answer that question.
Good. I like disagreement.
And when I say that, what I mean is really when you chart what's happened over the last, I would say, 20 years, nearly all of the demand growth for copper has taken place within China. Now, some of that is, of course, that China has become a large net exporter of not only kind of what we refer to as semi-fabricated, but also like the finished goods, so a microwave and a TV that you see. But even that said, there's been a lot of substitution, and people have found cheaper alternatives to copper. So, yes, I think it reflects the underlying health of the macroeconomy, and particularly what's going on in China. But then there's also some kind of copper-specific things going on, such as this substitution. And as I said, you've seen the use of copper really starting to reflect the paradigm shifts that you're seeing in terms of the overarching macro, with the importance of China growing hugely. And I mean, if we look back to, say, the year 2000, China really wasn't that much of a significant consumer of copper. Whereas today, over 50% of all copper consumed anywhere in the world happens in China. And that's really a startling change, and one that hasn't been seen before in the industry. China's rise and its increasing use of commodities is unlike anything that's happened, and I would argue unlike anything that is likely to happen again.
There's a lot in there to unpack. Let me start a little bit at the beginning. When we were talking about copper and its use in electronics, we're talking about chemistry here. And I know it's way too early to talk chemistry on the air, but just a little chemistry 101. There are different metals that conduct electricity better than copper. I know of one specifically, silver. But of course, the cost differential between silver, copper, and something like aluminum, which I believe is even cheaper than copper. But so copper it finds itself in that perfect sweet zone, the Goldilocks of being very good at conducting electricity, but it's not too expensive. Is that correct?
Yeah, absolutely. So one really important differential there is something you mentioned, which is price. And I mean, in the perfect world, if gold and silver were all around us, then they would probably be used vastly more within the electronics industries. But it's the fact that copper is relatively cheap, particularly in comparison to those two. But it is relatively cheap, and it is still a very good conductor that has promoted its use. So just to put that in a bit of context, so copper trades largely on the London Metal Exchange. It's got a few other exchanges globally. And it trades at the moment for about $6,400 a ton. I think it fell a little bit today. And then aluminium's price is something around the 1,800 mark currently. And it's the differential between those two metals that largely drives substitution. Copper is generally a better conductor of metal, but when you're not space constrained, you can use a lot more aluminium, and then you can kind of put through the same charge. So you have a bit of a technical dilemma sometimes about choosing space versus price. It is often what comes down. And another area where we've seen a lot of substitution has been more in the kind of telecommunications space with the rise of optic cables. And copper used to be a 1 million ton market here, and now it's down under 200,000 tons, which really does show the effects that substitution can have.
Speaking of the telephone market, can we get a few examples that we could really wrap our brains around? Right now, it's a little bit abstract, at least in my head. What are some specific uses for copper? I can think of power lines. I believe the wiring in our houses. What other uses might there be?
Building wire is really important. But then you look at electric vehicles, a small but really growing market for copper, where it's used. Solar power uses a large amount of copper, both to connect it to the grid in general and to connect all the different cells to each other. It's used in conventional automotive cars as an automotive harnessing. So every car that everyone owns has got about 20 to 25 kilograms of copper in. And that goes up to like 80 if you're looking at a full battery electric vehicle. So it's used in cars, in transport, in ships. It's used to distribute power. It's used in power generation itself. And it's also used in nearly all electronics, both in terms of wires and for the circuit boards itself.
And I think that broad list that you just provided us offers a hint to our listeners as to why we're discussing copper, because you may be wondering, well, this is a very niche market, but as you just described, copper is being used everywhere. And at the beginning of your introduction, you talked about how copper is broadly representative of perhaps of the whole market. You know, you're in London, I'm in Cayman right now. We're both our economies are both relying on finance and investment and the broader economy. Not entirely, but of course it's an important part of our economy. So that's the purpose of today's show, is to try to convey that when people ask, how is the global economy doing? How is the market doing? We typically think of, well, how's the stock market doing? But it's my thesis, I think, that we could also look to copper and say, well, how did copper do over some period of time, to get a sense of how the broader economy is doing. And I have a quick question for you. Is there any chance that you know of who Charles Alderton is by any chance?
I'm afraid I don't. I'm sorry.
It's a completely unfair question, and that's why I brought you on. But he was a late 19th century pharmacist. Some would call him American, but I'd say it's more accurate to say he was a Texan, and he formulated a uniquely flavored, caramel-colored soda pop called Dr. Pepper. Do you guys have Dr. Pepper in Britain?
We sure do, yeah.
Well, it's a shame because it's awful, but it's delicious. And to me, it's logical why a pepper-styled soft drink invented by a pharmacist should be called Dr. Pepper, but it may not be immediately clear to our audience, and certainly to me, why our caramel-colored metal is often referred to as Dr. Copper. Can you tell us for a couple of minutes before we go to a commercial break in a few minutes here, why do people say copper is Dr. Copper? What's the story behind that?
Yeah, I think it's really a historical reason. I think that long ago, and for a lot of time, copper's really been associated with economic development. And the rise and fall in copper's demand has really closely mirrored that of the kind of global macroeconomy. So, for example, during the GFC, you saw huge declines in copper demand outside of China, and then the Chinese government stepping in and providing a huge stimulus, which then boosted copper demand there. So I think it's the linkage that you've seen between economic development and copper's use that has garnered it that kind of name historically. Now, I don't know whether that name still fits. I think it's important in terms of a really good indicator, but I think copper, along with all of the other commodities, together really provide that kind of health check for the global market. I think any one commodity can be opened up to supply side constraints. It can be opened up to substitution effects, or it can be opened up to some form of, say, market manipulation that sometimes happens. So I think that copper is an important health check for the market, but I think we can also do the same by looking at, say, steels or aluminium, and it really helps us gain an underlying view of who is using what, why they're using it, and that's a really good health check, I think, for the macro side.
What kind of time frame should we be looking at when we look at copper and the other metals? Like, say the stock market goes up, people will say, okay, what did the market do yesterday? And as that's going to serve as some sort of indicator for our broader economy. But as you were just saying, there's different reasons why metal prices may move up and down relative to their specific supply and demand fundamentals. What kind of time frame should I say, well, where was copper and the metal and the different metals, where was it a month ago, a quarter ago, a year ago? How could we use these metals as a barometer for the global economy?
I think there's different time horizons depending on what kind of you want to look for. I think it's a really good short-term barometer about how sentiment is amongst investors particularly, and that can be anything up to the kind of minute, really, about how people are feeling. A piece of bad economic news from China and the price will fall. However, that said, if you look at it more on a kind of year-long view, then I think that is when you can start getting some of the noise coming in from the commodity itself. So some of the supply side issues could come to effect. But I think broadly it does track. So I would use short terms to take a gauge of where people are feeling about the market right now, and I would use the longer term, so year-long plus prices, to really gauge how growth has been over, say, that last kind of year, 2 year period. So longer term trends important for establishing how the health of the global economy is. Shorter term trends really dictating the mood on investors on a particular moment.
Fabulous, Charlie. Thank you. We will take a break now for a word from our sponsor, but stay with us as in 60 seconds we will expand our conversation and delve into something that Charlie just mentioned a moment ago, speculation, and we're also going to cover sardines. Come right back.
One TradeX knows there's more than one way to invest. One TradeX is the Cayman Islands' only fully licensed online broker-dealer, offering discount trading services to individual investors and traders, hedge fund managers, and family offices. One TradeX has the most competitive online trading prices of any offshore broker worldwide, with no custody or management fees, free demonstration accounts, and no charge to open an account with a $5,000 minimum deposit. Trade stocks, options, futures, bonds, and Forex. Learn more and open your free demo account today at OneTradeX.com. OneTradeX, the Cayman Islands' #1 choice for online brokerage. OneTradeX is licensed to conduct securities investment business by the Cayman Islands Monetary Authority.
This is
Money Sense, bringing an informed financial perspective to the Cayman community. Brought to you by the CFA Society Cayman Islands and sponsored by One TradeX.
And now, more Money Sense.
Welcome back. Just before we left, I raised the subject of sardines, which troubled Charlie as I brought him here to discuss copper and not sardines, but I'm going to link the two together. This may be an apocryphal story. Charlie, you tell me if it's true, because it's supposed to have taken place in Britain during the Second World War, and apparently tins of sardines were very hard to obtain. And as a result, the tins themselves were often simply traded between companies without ever being eaten. And the story goes that one day a company decided to open some tins to provide a celebratory lunch for its workforce. And, as you can imagine, they found that all the sardines had decayed and were inedible. And when the company complained to its supplier, they were told, "That is not our fault. Those sardines were for buying and selling, not for eating." Charlie, copper, is it used just for building, or does it also have a speculative use, like sardine cans?
That's a really good story. On the copper itself, yeah, it is used to speculate. And you have various places in the world where this takes place. So the three major exchanges for copper are the London Metal Exchange, also known as the LME. You've got the COMEX in the US, and then you've also got the Shanghai Futures Exchange in China. And while a lot of the function of those exchanges is price discovery, and a lot of it is about a market of last resort in terms of the LME for consumers and sellers of metal, there's also a significant proportion of speculation which takes place on these exchanges. And really the how long or short the general body of speculators are has a really key effect on the copper price. I would argue it has more of an effect on the copper price than it does in, say, aluminium or steels or most of the other base commodities that we cover. And what you see people taking bets. Really, a lot of these bets are China-focused. It's how well does someone believe that the outlook for China is looking, or people are going to take bets on how constrained supply, and copper's really all about mine supply, and how constrained that is going to be in the future. And then they take these kind of speculative positions, so they'll go long and short depending on their expectations for the price. And that's a really key short-term market driver. So, for example, last year we saw a really bullish sentiment building in the copper market. And that caused a lot of investors to go really very net long. And then the price started going higher significantly. And I would say that there wasn't really the fundamental support for that. And then the price subsequently fell back down to the kind of 6,400 level that we're at now. And in terms of copper and sardines, not a comparison that I've made before, but one that I will be making in the future. And the similar thing kind of happened, I suppose, in China. And What you saw here was a very large fraud based around the holding of metal and using it really as a collateral and as a financial instrument rather than just a means to an end, as in it changed copper from being a commodity that ultimately is used to produce, to transmit energy largely, to a kind of financial product. And you saw people lending or being lent significant sums of money based off their holdings of copper. And in the end, those holdings of copper had been used with at multiple places with which to gain funds. And then, obviously, this unwound. So, yeah, copper has a very large financial element to it. And within China, you saw it being used as collateral for a large amount of loans, which subsequently unwound rather dramatically.
And so just to explain a little bit further to our audience, tell me if I'm wrong here, Charlie, but it's difficult to secure financing in China, or at least it was cheaper to get a hold of copper, put that copper up as collateral with some financial institution or entity, and then take those funds and invest them into the real estate market, no doubt. Make your return, and then sell that copper, repay the loan, and then you've made a profit without the copper actually ever being used for electrical wires. And so, but then in 2000, and so this was supposedly really ramping up, like say after the great financial crisis, I believe, and I think it peaked in 2014. I have a Reuters article here from December, and they said, I'm just going to quote this. What will the 2014 markets be remembered for? And for base metals, the defining black swan event of the year was the Qingdao port scandal, news of which broke at the end of May. And as you said, basically, they were rehypothecating the collateral multiple times for investment, and hopefully not everyone would come back and claim that copper. And so my question to you, is that still happening? How big did this other use of copper, how big did it ever grow to the market? Was it like 10% of the market, 20% of demand? Is it now maybe 5%? Do you have a sense of how much copper is being used for trading and not for eating, as we said with our sardines?
That's a really interesting question. So in terms of the speculation that I was talking about earlier, a lot of that is paper trading. So there's not necessarily going to be copper delivered or consumed at the end of it. Whereas the point you're making there is a really good one. It's a slightly different use of copper, particularly in China, because, as you said, the access to those loans was really quite tricky. So by using the copper, it enabled a lot of companies to get access to finance that otherwise they wouldn't have been able to get. I think that largely that particular side of the market has slowed. You do still see a lot of copper being traded, but that's got a legitimate market need, whereas what happened in China, I think, is largely behind us, but copper is still used certainly as collateral. What kind of happened in that scandal is it was being used, as you said, at multiple points. But within China, we are still hearing that copper can be used at times. It's difficult to quantify exactly how much of the market. So the copper market's roughly 24 million tons, and the vast majority of that does end up getting consumed really as that final product. So it is a small part of the market. It happens largely in China in that particular end use. But the trading of copper and the speculation of copper on the exchanges is still massive business.
Charlie, the world's biggest producer of copper is the country of Chile. And I know that you were in Santiago just a month ago, or no, a couple of weeks ago, and you gave a presentation, one of several, I believe, to the industry. The whole industry meets each year, meaning you got to meet with all manner of clients. What is, as we got about 4 minutes left, I suppose this is my last question to you, what is top of mind with all those people from around the world that you're meeting and talking to? What is it that they are worried about or optimistic about when it comes to copper?
So I would say that there's a really quite a obvious split between how people are seeing the market at the moment. So on the producer side, there tends to be a lot more bullish sentiment out there, and people are expecting prices to pick back up rather strongly. Now, worryingly, not only for copper, but also for the global macro, you're seeing really the consumers being a lot less positive, particularly outside of China. So demand in Europe has slowed, demand in Northeast Asia has slowed as well. US is still performing in line with GDP. And all hopes are really being pinned on any form of significant Chinese surplus. So the one in 08-09 boosted copper consumption in the country by 1 million tons. Now, the stimulus that is taking place now is very different in nature. It's a tax-based stimulus, or a tax cut-based stimulus, rather than an investment and a spend-based stimulus. So that's certainly one of the key talking points in the market is, one, how large will this Chinese stimulus be? Can it make up for slowing demand outside of China? And will this new stimulus in a new form have an effect like the last one? On the flip side, you're also starting to see some tightening in terms of copper mine supply. So this year you're seeing one very big mine, particularly the Grasberg mine, it is going to see its output fall significantly, which is going to mean really you're going to see a relatively flat picture for global mine supply. So it's going to be the interaction of those two key variables, the slowing of Chinese mines, how fast does Chinese demand slow compared to last year? How fast does demand slow in the rest of the world in the framework of a weakening macroeconomic picture? And will there be enough copper mine supply as this key mine sees output fall?
Charlie, I want the audience to be able to find you on the internet and read more about copper if they wanted to, but let me sneak in a very quick question, because you didn't mention electric vehicles when you were saying what are the number one issues. Why are electric vehicles very quickly top of mind in the copper market right now?
So the current electric vehicle market is relatively small for copper. It's probably about 150,000 tons out of a 24 million ton market. So in terms of at the moment, it's not changing the dial. But what is exciting is that in the future, this application really could help drive copper demand significantly higher.
Excellent. Charlie, where can people find your work?
We are obviously based in London, but we've got offices all around the world. And to gain access to our material, please send a request into crugroup.com.
Thank you very much, Charlie. On behalf of our audience, I want to thank you for joining us, sharing your insight. I think it's a unique kind of way to measure how the economy is doing instead of just looking to the stock market. So I appreciate it. I just wanted to tell our audience that you listen to Money Sense. You can re-listen on the CFA Society Cayman Islands webpage, and we will be back in a fortnight with a new episode of Money Sense. Thank you.
The voice of the Cayman Islands.
89.9 FM in Grand Cayman and 93.9 FM in Cayman Brac and Little Cayman.
Silver wings shining in the sunlight.
Radio Cayman.